Friends, a defensive use of force is not just about whether or not you're alive, in other words, winning the fight. It's about winning the fight after the fight as well. And we have an update on one of the most popular videos in the main channel's history. It's one that has elicited a lot of split reactions and a lot of people who disagreed with me, and we have an update on that case, actually a plea agreement. And so I think it's an effective time, a good time to talk about the legal and moral use of force in the Las Vegas case of a smoke shop clerk, Rod Suna, having shot a robber slash thief who came into his shop. So moral and legal use of force with an actual case that we can talk about. Let's talk about it. So before we go any farther, I really want you to go and watch that video. It's got about 300,000 views on it. You know, it's certainly not one of the million ones because I think people disagreed with me on it in some respects. But I want you to watch it anyways. So I'm going to put a card here, and then we'll put a link in the description. And I want you to watch that video. I've also put a link in the description to the news stories that talk about Suna's first appearance in court, talk about his plea agreement. He pled to a gross misdemeanor of pointing a firearm at a person, which could have carried up to a year in jail, but the judge gave him unsupervised probation. And so basically this whole thing went away for him. He did commit a firearm offense, but it is a misdemeanor firearm offense, so he maintained his Second Amendment rights. He got off as easy as I really think he could have. So make sure that you go watch the video, read the news stories, then let's come back and talk about it. Okay, first of all, when I ran this story by a whole bunch of attorneys, they really said, okay, he was probably overcharged to begin with. That murder probably wasn't the right charge here. Perhaps manslaughter, negligent homicide, something like that. But, murder was kind of asking for the moon. But if you went and read the news story, what you saw is that the prosecuting attorney said, man, something clearly was wrong here. And one of the big things that they saw was the proximity, was the totality of the circumstances. And the prosecutor said that there was 40 feet of separation between the victim, the man who, well, I guess you can't call him a victim. He ended up, pleading to a crime. So Rod Suna, who was the clerk in the store, and the man that he shot. Man is a boy. He's 13 years old, for gracious sakes. But now let's think about what happens here. These are three middle school dummies. And one of them holds the door. The other two run in, head to the walls, and start stealing stuff. So they're trying to steal some hookahs so they can smoke the Hobbit leaf or whatever. I don't know. As soon as sees them coming, draws his pistol immediately and goes to work. And he shoots the deceased 7 times. He shot that kid. Now, I'm going to tell you, one of the reasons that the prosecutor was wobbly and was like, man, I'm going to end up charging, all 7 of the shots entered from the back. Now, we can talk all we want about the legalities of that, and I think, and I say this all the time, that it's not about where you shoot someone, it's why you shoot them. However, and I think that probably would have stood up in court saying, hey, wait a minute, he was in fear for his life. However, recognize that can weigh on the prosecutor. And so with all of that, he shot the kid 7 times and then kind of walked over his corpse when he went and see what else is going on. Now, what happened after that? Well, the police show up and I think he thinks, man, I'm doing okay. Well, then things aren't going as well as they want. They ended up arresting him. He had to post a $150,000 bond. And then that's from December of 2016 to this month. So we're talking 14 months. This has gone on for him. Court appearances, lawyer time, talks with the district attorney, those kind of things where he finally kind of can get past this. And in that gross misdemeanor, he ordered him, the judge ordered him to complete some community service and also ordered him to pay $3,000 worth of court costs to the court for the cost of his prosecution. And so you think, okay, so this ended up being a justifiable shoot. Well, I don't think it was. I think the fact that he pled to a crime tells me a couple things. Number one, the fact that, he wanted this to go away. And many times this is how this is going to go, right? So he hired a very high-profile attorney. If you go look in the news story and you look up the attorney that he hired, he is a founding partner of a major law firm, and that guy that he hired has credentials like this long, like all of them, for what he was doing. And so he hired a really good attorney. Well, hiring that really good attorney got him a good outcome. Instead of a murder charge or facing a trial, that attorney got the prosecutor to agree to a plea agreement that basically got him off as a slap on the wrist, unsupervised probation, $3,000, and then this all goes away. Again, it's even a misdemeanor, and it's not a domestic violence or whatever, so he doesn't lose his Second Amendment rights. So from that perspective, he probably got off pretty okay. However, let's think about the totality of this. First and foremost, I want to talk about whether this was a win or not, and impress upon every one of us why we say that using a firearm is a tool of last resort. It has to be a tool of last resort. It's not can I shoot someone, it's must I shoot someone. And if you have another option and it's not I must shoot him right now to protect myself from deadly force, I'm going to tell you, I recommend that you don't. And here's why. Go read the news story in his plea agreement, and you will see that Rod Suna said in that he never wishes on his worst enemy what he has had to endure for the last 14 months, that he is grossly and terribly sorry for what he's done, and that he sits up at night thinking about using deadly force when it may not have been 100% necessary, and how sorry he was to the family and how sorry he was to his family. And so let's think here for a minute. If you use deadly force, I want you to recognize, man, one of the things that drives me nuts is I see people, whether it's not so much here on the Extra channel, but on the main YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, in the Gunternet in general, and they go, oh man, I wish somebody would. I'd smoke a fool, man. Oh, I'd smoke somebody, man. I'll shoot him. And I hear that all the time. Well, I'd just shoot him. You should just shoot him, man. Just shoot them all. Rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. And you can go watch that video for the fallacy of that. But the reality is, I mean, using deadly force is going to change everything about your life. It's going to affect you emotionally, spiritually, relationally, financially, can affect your freedom, can affect you vocationally. It's going to change everything in your life. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't use deadly force. In fact, I carry a firearm every day, and I recommend that people do carry firearms. But just recognize that when you use it, your whole life changes, especially if you use it and you make the wrong decision. And so if you said, man, I may not have had to have used deadly force, then you did, and the costs of that are astronomical. Let's think about the financial burden that he's going to have to pay here. So first of all, he got bailed out. His bail was set at $150,000, and so if he had to post for a bail bondsman, I kind of doubt he had 150 grand laying around, then that cost him $15,000. He hired a high-profile attorney. Really good attorneys right now, criminal defense attorneys in particular, are somewhere around $500 an hour or even more, depending. I mean, some, depending on what they do, can be $250 to $300 an hour. But in cases like this, people are going to, have that kind of oomph to defend you well. This guy hired, $500 an hour is probably minimum. Guy here in Phoenix who I know, who is kind of the guy who's known as criminal defense and firearms defense, he charges $650 an hour. So now you ask the question, how many hours did he have to have that attorney for the last 14 months? Well, I guarantee you that right away, that attorney says at least, just not even a start, he probably needed a retainer of $25,000 to $50,000 to start the guy's defense, not to pay for it, to start it. And they even kind of, they have to watch out for ethics stuff, but work with lenders. Here's the paperwork, and here are the lenders you need to call to take a mortgage out on your house so that you can start to pay for your defense. How much did it cost overall? I don't know. At $500 an hour, 10 hours in, he's at $5,000. Do you think it took 100 hours? Do you think it took 200 lawyer hours and experts and him talking to the defense attorneys and talking to his team and talking to the district attorney and the judge and appearing in court and all that stuff? You can get to 200 billable hours. Just like that, at 200 billable hours at $500 an hour, guess what you got? You got $100,000. And so, what are we going to do here? That's just like that. So, wouldn't surprise me at all if he spent $150,000, $200,000 even on his case. Now, you might say, oh, but John, we have, I have insurance for that. I have one of the insurance products. Well, maybe. First of all, if you have an insurance product, if what you have is an insurance policy on self-defense, recognize that he pled guilty to a crime, and so he was doing an illegal thing. Insurance cannot cover illegal acts, and him pointing a gun at somebody was an illegal act. He admitted as much in taking the plea agreement, and therefore the insurance won't pay him. And so he's out of luck. Now, maybe you have one of the better policies that's a defensive services membership or some kind of a prepaid legal plan or something like that, and there are multiples of those. And if you did, then maybe the attorney fees might have been covered. but the loss of work and all the other stuff, is bail covered in what you're doing? All those things, all those costs probably add up unless you have one of those significant policies. And I do recommend that for most people. I mean, I recommend it for everybody, but most people, I think, don't have that. If you look at the number of people who are insured or have a defensive services membership, which is what I prefer, versus the number of people who have CCWs, it's a small fraction. So there's a lesson for us all. Make sure that you have the coverage, because otherwise it's just going to ruin you financially. Secondly, and more importantly, let's talk about the can, may, should, must paradigm. Can you shoot somebody? Well, at some point, this guy, the prosecutor said, man, I don't have a strong enough case to actually convict this guy of murder. And so at some level you said, well, yeah, I can shoot this guy. But must he? Well, what's the difference there? He had 40 feet of space. He had enough time to issue a verbal command, which is why we say, man, use those verbal commands. Hey, get out of here. Leave me alone. I have a gun. I'll defend myself. So drawing the gun, okay, fine. Having that gun at a high compressed ready or a low ready, depressed muzzle, something like that, great. Even I'd say driving that gun out there so that it's on target. Say, get out of my store, man. It might have been okay in this instance, and seeing what happened from there if the guy charged. Again, from 40 feet, you got a lot of time there in order to protect yourself, especially because there's a turn and a counter and all those other things. So you got space. Use that space, friends. And where are you going to learn that? You're going to learn that in class. You're not going to learn that in your CCW class. You're not going to learn that in your basic pistol class. You're going to learn that in your defensive marksmanship class, in your practical pistol skills class, in your force on force class. You're going to learn that in your legal class, in your classes that go beyond the basics of concealed carry. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, you should have to take classes in order to exercise constitutional rights. I live in a constitutional carry state, and I think that's great. But I also say that every person who carries a firearm needs to continually educate themselves on the effective use of force. So in other words, being able to use your firearm effectively, but also the moral and legal aspects of the use of deadly force. And I don't think that this young man was ready for the emotional impact, the spiritual impact, the relational impact, and the financial impact that this use of force had on him. And maybe if he had been trained in those and he knew them going in, then maybe that's all it would have taken to use a verbal command to gain compliance that way, so that he maybe could have seen, gosh, in that moment I drew the gun and then, oh, wait a minute, he's not armed, not a deadly threat. Maybe I got to go to something else that I carry on me, like a pepper spray or something, if the guy didn't just run off. That's why I say intermediate tools, understanding awareness, knowing the legal and moral use of force, knowing de-escalation, knowing how to use your verbal skills. Not just, hey man, are we friends, but like, get out of my face, and knowing how to use a command voice and a command presence when you have a firearm on you. And all those things have to be trained and have to be worked on. Get some training. And let's also think about the last 14 months of this man's life. He has to deal with the fact that he took a life and he may not have needed to. And he's had to take time off from work to go to court and to meet with his attorney and to see the DA, and sleepless nights wondering if he's going to spend a decade in jail. Friends, be careful with this stuff. If there's one thing I want to get into your head as a defensive firearms trainer, it's this: the use of deadly force should be only in a last resort, only when nothing else happens. If I don't use deadly force here, I die. Okay, I use deadly force. But if it's, looking for an opportunities, ooh, I wish somebody would, change your mindset, man. It will, and that's not for me, that's for you. It'll change everything about your world. And I don't want that for you. I want you instead to recognize that if you do it the right way, in that moment of, man, there was nothing else I could do, I had to use deadly force to defend my life, then many of these consequences go away. However, if you're not trained up and you use it inappropriately, you face charges, you potentially set your family up for harassment. I will say that this young man, okay, so now he's done with criminal, but he ain't done with civil yet. The fact that he admitted to a crime and pled to a crime is definitely going to come up in the civil trial, and there's no question that his family is going to sue at this point, and who knows what kind of damages they're going to get, and they're going to have a huge piece of evidence that says, look, he pled to a crime. And gosh, guys, you got to put all that into account. Finally, again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't carry a gun. I'm not saying you shouldn't use a gun to defend your life. I'm just saying you got to know, absolutely stone cold, you got to know when to use deadly force. You got to know that deadly force was the only option that you had available, and you have to be able to articulate that well, and the objective evidence, everything around, including video evidence, has to say, yep, there was reasonable evidence of a deadly threat, a threat of grievous bodily harm or death right there, and that justified them using that. And if you don't, you get punished with process. You might get punished in the courts. You're certainly going to get a whole bunch in civil court, and I don't want that. So thankfully, this man avoided a significant jail time. He's very contrite for what happened to the family that, of the young man that he killed. And I think hopefully they show this video to kids in middle school. It says, don't do stupid stuff like this because you might get shot doing it. And again, yeah, I mean, I'm not justifying anything that those kids did. It was evil and stupid and wrong. But again, that doesn't help this man who is now looking at the civil suit and thankfully avoiding jail time. So friends, go get some training on the legal use of force, on moral use of force, on force, so then that way you know when the right time is, on using your command presence, on verbal skills, on understanding timing so that you're more than just have put some holes in paper on the range. So then that way this kind of stuff, the chances of it happening to you are minimum. Guys, I wish we didn't have to talk about this stuff, but we do, because I don't just want to teach you how to survive the fight, but the fight after the fight. So please listen to me on this one, guys, and cover your asp.